Hello, my name is Dr. Deborah Vollmer Dahlke. I'm a researcher at the Center for Population Health and Aging at Texas A&M University. I've been working on cancer clinical trials for about the last 10 or 15 years, and it's my pleasure to work with BCRC, Breast Cancer Resource Center, and share with you some information about cancer clinical trials, specifically breast cancer trials. I'm not a medical doctor, and nothing I'm sharing today is medical advice. Rather, it's information sharing about breast cancer clinical trials. We know how hard it is and life-changing it is to receive a breast cancer diagnosis. There's endless information out there, and it can be just overwhelming to sift through it all and figure out what's right for you. And choosing a treatment for breast cancer trials or for breast cancer can also be overwhelming because you're participating with your physician. So some of this may be helpful to you today for having discussions with your physician and just for you to think about as well. So today's discussion, well, what are we going to talk about? I'll explain what clinical trials are. You may already know, and this will be kind of a refresher course. And why should you be interested? Why now specifically? And what do you need to know about to consider a clinical trial? I have a list of questions you can ask your oncologist, or if you get to a study coordinator, the person who manages a trial, you could ask those of her or him. We'll talk about some myths and facts about clinical trials, and we'll also show you how you can search for your own on trials, or you and your family members can, and what resources exist to help you pay for being in a clinical trial. So what do you need to know about considering to be in a trial? Well, first of all, you want to set your family's priorities straight. Seeing a clear breakdown of what matters most to help to you and your family is helpful when you're sorting through all the treatment options. You'll want to reflect on what's important to you, your goals, your home and family life, your work schedule, transportation, and other aspects that might become important in a trial. Many people who've just been diagnosed with cancer believe that cancer clinical trials are reserved only for those who've exhausted all prior treatment options. And that's not true, because even though there are many standard treatment options, you may be considering those. Far from being a last resort, clinical trials can sometimes be a first-line treatment or a first treatment option. Why is that? It's because today, more than ever, we're exploring and identifying so many new cancer treatments. And some researchers and their trial design have to limit trials to people who have not had an existing standard of care drug, for example, a platinum therapy. And they do that because they need to see how the drug will work in what's called a naive patient. You should ask your medical team early and maybe even often about trial opportunities. New trials are opening every week, and we'll talk about that too. So what are the different kinds of clinical trials? Well, we kind of group them into three types. The first are treatment or intervention trials. These are the trials where patients are given a new drug or tested with a new device. Supportive care trials can be more quality of life trials. They often involve meditation or physical activity or even diet. Sometimes they're just surveys, but I always think of them as a good way to introduce yourself to trials. And thirdly, there are registry trials. More and more today, we're discovering so many different kinds of genetic profiles and things that make a difference. Everybody's body is different, and those differences are important to study. Registry trials usually collect information in a survey. Sometimes they'll ask you for a sample of your tumor, which is encased in paraffin. And these registry trials serve as a really rich resource for researchers. They're just data, but it means so much to have people participating in them. So let's talk about treatment trials. Those may be the ones you're most interested in. They have 4 phases. Phase 1 is the earliest time. It's the first time a drug has been tested in a human being. And it is just to find a safe dose. What is the dose that's just right for most people? Usually has about 15 to 30 participants, and maybe they last 6 to 18 months. Phase 2 is where it gets kind of really interesting, because in phase 2, they're determining what is it about this drug, or how does this drug cure people? How does it cure cancer? And sometimes phase 2 trials are combination trials where they combine the drug with a standard of care. SOC up here means standard of care. And it's used really to better understand the therapy. Usually there are about maybe 100 participants, sometimes more. They last about 2 to 5 years, and sometimes they're randomized. And they're randomized to compare the standard of care with the new drug. But phase 3 is where the patients are really preparing for FDA approval, and the drug companies are too. So participants are always randomized here. Sometimes it's 100 patients, usually it's several thousand, sometimes 2,000 to 3,000. They can last 2 to 5 years and sometimes more. And the endpoint is FDA approval for the drug. Phase 4 trials are post FDA approval. That means they're already out in the market, and they're often marketing studies. They're usually just database driven. But on average, it takes about 7 years of trials for a drug to be approved by the FDA once the trial starts. Let's do myths and facts. Myths and facts are always fun. So myth, if I take a trial, I might be given a placebo. Placebos are never used in cancer trials because they would never want to put a patient at risk by not having an effective therapy. So patients with metastatic breast cancer or early stage cancer can be given either the standard of care or the new drug, and sometimes even a combination, but never a placebo. Sometimes in other types of trials like diabetes trials and other trials that are not so critical for the patients, there will be placebos, but never in a cancer trial. So myth, my doctor, not me, should decide if a clinical trial is right for me. Your doctor and your care team are so important, and they are valuable resources of information about risk and benefits in taking part in a trial. But sometimes your doctor may not be aware of all the trials in your region or other parts of the country, or new trials that have come about. And sometimes physicians don't encourage trials, but ultimately the only person who can decide if a trial is right for you is you. Another myth is researchers don't treat participants well. I think that one's also called the guinea pig fear. But a recent study by a coalition of cancer groups found that the vast majority of cancer survivors who'd worked in a clinical trial were happy with their experience. They would recommend participating, and most importantly, 90% rejected the idea that participants felt like a guinea pig. In fact, usually what happens in clinical trials is because they want to be so careful about the patients, and you're so valuable as a participant. You get maybe more attention and perhaps better care because you're working with world-class scientists who are running the trial. Myth, I need to live near a large cancer center to take part in a clinical trial. Well, breast cancer trials are taking place in local hospitals and clinics throughout the country. Some take place in local cancer clinics and doctors' offices. Those are mostly phase 3 trials. But more and more, and kind of as a result of COVID and the pandemic, but also with the increase in access to video and internet, and also because many of the new cancer drugs are oral drugs, so you just basically take a pill. So more often than used to occur, patients can start at a major cancer center, an academic cancer center like MD Anderson or San Antonio or someplace like that, and go home with their drugs and work with their own oncologist. Last myth, if I choose to enter a breast cancer trial, I have to stay in no matter what. It's absolutely not true. It's always your choice, and you have the right to leave at any point in time. So how safe are clinical trials? Well, you have to realize that when a trial is finally open to people like us, the researchers and scientists have been looking at that agent or that drug for many years with human cells and mice and sometimes even monkey tests. And for a trial to be approved for opening by the FDA means that all sorts of patient protection and safety have already been looked at very, very deeply. There's a large number of different types of treatment trials. There's targeted therapies, hormonal, immunotherapies, studies for genetic mutations, and studies for specific types of breast cancer, that is BRCA, triple negative, inflammatory, whatever. So there's a lot out there. And increasingly there are trials, because we're learning more about our genes and our DNA, that are for a particular genetic type of breast cancer. So today in Texas, this is in March in 2022, there are just over 300 clinical trials that are open for patients. 298 are treatment trials, 28 are the supportive care that we talked about, and 5 are patient registries. But overall in the US, there are over 1,000 breast cancer trials that are open. So what kinds of questions should I be asking my doctor or the trial coordinator? I'm not going to go through all of these. I'll go pretty quickly, but you want to know what the purpose of the study. What are they looking at? Is it a phase 1-2, a phase 1-2 combined? Is it a continuation study of a 1-2? Will patients who progress in the study be allowed to cross over? This is really important because if the drug's working for you, you want to be able to cross over to go forward. And if the treatment works to you, you want to know if you can keep using it and if they'll give it to you for free or if there'll be a cost. Does the study involve a combination drug? That is, does it involve a standard of care SOC treatment that's already on the market? And if so, what is that? And does the physician have a choice? How will the treatments be received? Will they be oral, the kind of a pill, intravenous, or intradermal means under your skin? Will you be randomized? That's an important question. And when will you learn your treatment assignment? How long will the study last? How many times will you have to go to the center? Or what do you need to do over that period of time? And do you have to pay for any part of the study, such as scans or biopsies? Usually your insurance will cover these costs. In fact, in Texas, even before the Affordable Care Act, our legislature passed a law that insurance companies had to cover regular care when people were on clinical trials. You want to know if there's reimbursement for travel costs, lodging, meals, childcare. Will you be able to see your own oncologist? I earlier said sometimes you can get an oral treatment and go back to your home oncologist. You want to know what the side effects might be, if they discovered any. You want to know what follow-up care might be if you stop after the study is ended. And what happens if you stop participating in the study? And finally, what are the credentials and research experience of the physician and study staff? I can tell you they're usually pretty good because the FDA wouldn't allow them to participate in a trial if they weren't experienced. So what are some other important things to know about clinical trials? Well, first of all, no one can ever force you to enroll in a trial. You're given what's called a consent document. And this is really, you may have heard of the Tuskegee studies or in Alabama, where prisoners were participating in a trial and they didn't know what they were given, they didn't know what was happening. That will never happen again because internationally we now have rules about trials. So you're given a consent document and you have to sign it yourself, but you should also plan to take it home and share it with your family and really think about it. You'll be told what to expect will happen in the trial, when and how you receive the drugs, what the potential side effects are, any additional procedures such as biopsies or PET scans, and financial costs that aren't covered by the trial. It's always your right to drop out of a study at any time and for any reason. But one of the things I want you to realize about clinical trials is that every medicine or medical device like an X-ray or a CT or a PET scan, even aspirin, and the allergy medicines we use for cedar fever in Texas, all of those drugs, some of them are over the counter now, once went through clinical trials, all 3 stages. And that's what's important is to understand is that for drugs to be used, we have to go through this process. Should I look for myself for a trial? How do I find trials? Well, often your oncologist or your oncology nurse may suggest that you consider trials, and they can help you determine the risk and benefits of those trials. And it's a good conversation to have, but as I said earlier, they may not all be aware of all the trial options, and some physicians, for some maybe reason of their own, may not be supportive of clinical research studies. So you can search for your own, and we'll talk about how to do that. And you may also want to seek the help of your BCRC navigators. Clinicaltrials.gov is a national database, but actually it works internationally as well. And it lists all of the open and accruing trials. The word accruing just means that the trial is open and accepting patients. It's clinical trial talk. But clinical trials is a great resource, but it can be confusing. It's written by doctors, it's written for medical professionals, and you can stumble through it. A better resource, I think, for you would be breastcancertrials.org, because it's written for people like us to find trials, and you can match your diagnostic needs and find out where trials are open. So let's look at it. So this is the Breast Cancer Trials homepage. It's a resource for you, for your navigators, for your medical team. And it has a ton of information, but what's most important, a couple of things are important. One is that you'll see along at the top that it's in Spanish, it's in Mandarin Chinese. There's two other things that are important. One is that to find a trial, you can just browse the trials, or you can start entering your own information and match to trials. So let's see what happens next. Oh, in addition to just general trials, there's a part of breastcancertrials.org that is a search engine just for metastatic breast cancer. I actually had the honor of working with the breast cancer trials folks in developing this and seeing how it would work. And what it does, it's very specific to metastatic breast cancer. So they ask a couple of questions and then quickly get to the list of trials that are all metastatic trials. So this is the second page of breastcancertrials.org. And what's really good about it is that there's lots of helpful hints, things to ask your care provider. I talked about those questions. You can find them here or some like them, how to get online help. You can find trials depending on where you are in your cancer journey. I haven't had breast cancer, but I'm concerned about it. I want to know about preventative trials, or I'm newly diagnosed but haven't started treatment, or I recently started treatment. This is an example of what you'd find if you selected a trial. So let's look at this real quickly. Across the top, you see neoadjuvant chemo and radiation, but no surgery for stage 1, 2 triple negative, low ER, HER2 or 2 positive breast cancer. That's a mouthful. So the breast cancer trials has made this simpler. So what they do is they take a very complex study summary and they write it in plain English. So to take part in the study, you have to be 40 years old or older. You have to have this kind of breast cancer, and it has to be before surgery. And it also tells you kind of, remember those questions, weekly study visits during radiation treatment. So it involves both maybe perhaps a drug and radiation. And it says the nearest, I pulled this for myself. So it shows the nearest research site is Houston. It's 145 miles. There's 6 sites. And along the bottom, you see what's involved, more information, how to contact them. You can add to favorites if you want to, or just say you're not interested and go find another one. So one of the things that's important about clinical trials is that most of the costs, many of the costs for treatment are covered, but there's still out-of-pocket costs. Some of them are the same out-of-pocket cost you face anyway in treatment in terms of going, transportation, parking, meals, lodging, all of those things. But cancer is expensive. Many people who go into cancer care have to take a break from their jobs. They're taking care of their family. So many cancer centers have social workers or financial navigators who can help you find resources to cover those costs. Frequently, those resources are only available to low-income family, but it's important to ask because sometimes the eligibility criterion is as much as 700 or 800 poverty level, which means for a family of 3, that might be $100,000 a year. So always ask. Some trials cover the cost of travel and lodging of the participants. And lastly, the Lazarex Foundation is active with many cancer centers. I know that they're active in Texas. I know that MD Anderson uses them, but I think there are others. But you can contact them directly, and they provide financial assistance to under-resourced individuals and their families that are eligible for trial participation. So some final notes. You can always ask your BCRC navigator to help you find a trial that might be right for you. You can print out information on specific trials using BCT, breastcancertrials.org, and share them with your medical team to learn more about the risk and benefits and find out what they think. The list of trial resources information, as I said, is some of it's on breastcancertrials.org, but you can also ask your navigators. So thank you for your time, and remember the reasons why it's important to consider cancer clinical trials as an option. Today, only about 5 to 6% of breast cancer patients currently participate in clinical trials. And actually, more breast cancer patients than any other kind of patients participate in trials. But the faster that enrollment of trials occurs, the faster these new therapies will get to patients like you. Patients in trials receive the newest therapies. And as I said earlier, they often receive more focused care and from clinical experts. Additionally, participation in trials means that potential improved cures can get to all patients. And it's really critical to have all kinds of people in breast cancer trials, in any trial. We need young, old, men, women, racial and ethnic groups, because even where you live or your diet may have an effect on a new medication. So for trials to be generalizable, that is to be helpful for large sections of our population, we need participation by all different kinds of people. So remember, it's an option, it's your option, and you always have your choice. So thank you again for listening to me. I wish you well in your journey, and I appreciate the care and the concern that you receive from breast cancer both from breast cancer trials, but mostly from BCRC and their wonderful navigators.